Howdy and welcome to my channel. I've recently finished work not on a dress from Homestuck, but on a Homestuck themed dress that I wanted to share with you all after working so hard on it. The dress itself isn't too groundbreaking. The real exciting part of it is the 3 rows of extended Zodiac signs along the hemline, all lovingly backstitched by hand to the dress. Before I could do any fancy embroidery, I needed a dress. The first step for me was to cut out the bodice and mark the darts, because I made the dress by hand. You could easily do this with a store-bought dress, but I decided to be ambitious. I decided to fully line the bodice, so this step essentially gets repeated twice, once in my main fabric, which is a nice cotton sateen, and the other with a flannel back satin, which slips nicely against any under things that you happen to be wearing, and also provided me with a little bit of warmth, because I wore this to a convention in upstate New York in March. Once all the darts were sewn, I ironed them out nice, flat, and smooth with the help of a tailor's ham and some best press, and then I did up the side seams. And I went the extra step of actually finishing my side seams with some whip stitches, just because the cotton frayed pretty badly and I didn't want to risk them moving about and fraying more while I was working. Once my seam allowances were down and decidedly not going anywhere, I sewed the darts. These darts help to shape the dress and make it lay nicely around the bust and to taper down nicely to the waist. There are 4 darts in this bodice, one set above the bust and one set from the bust to the waist to help it taper. This pattern, by the way, is one I drafted myself and has a fitted sweetheart neckline, wide shoulders, and straps, which I'm going to show you the process of making right now, but that I ended up later removing in order to replace them with red ribbon tied in bows above the shoulders. Shoulder straps attached, I was able to pin and sew the satin lining layer onto the neckline. And I would highly recommend checking many times to make sure that this is together the right way, with the right sides facing each other, and the straps not in the way. It's very easy to mess up. Also, pro tip, make sure that you clip at that corner at the center front, because otherwise it won't look right when the fabric is ironed and it won't have the right curve to the sweetheart neckline. Once the bodice is mostly assembled, I let the lining and the outside flop around separately while I focused on the skirt. And the skirt is made of 3 panels, utilizing the selvage or the factory folded edges as the edges that are sewn together, so I didn't have to do any separate finishing work. And then each is cut to be 24.5 inches long, because that's the length of my transparent ruler and falls about to my knees, so it's convenient. Once my 3 bodice panels were sewed together, I did something that you absolutely should not do, and that's hem the skirt before I have it gathered and attached to the bodice with the back seam done up. I did this because I was worried about the embroidery not being finished in time, but I did get it finished on time, and all I really did was make sure that the back seam didn't line up at the hem. Once the first part of my hem was done, I added interfacing along the hemline to give the embroidery a solid base, and finished hemming the bottom of the dress. Sewing in the interfacing helped it stay stuck on the one side, and for the other side it was held down with embroidery, but I did temporarily baste the interfacing down on the top just to keep it in place while I was embroidering, because it doesn't stay stuck as nicely as I would prefer it to. With the hemline all taken care of, I finally gathered down the top edge of the skirt so that the width of the 3 panels matched the width of my waistline. Then finally, the skirt was attached to the bodice. Remember how we left the lining flapping freely around? It'll be whip stitched down, so I'm just sewing the gathered portion of the skirt onto the outer layer of my dress fabric. Once that was done, I sewed both seam allowances down toward the bodice with top stitching so that I could make sure that that would stay down where I put it, and that it would also be easier to whip stitch the lining to. Then it was time to install the zipper. I chose to baste my zipper into place beforehand because that's another one of those things that's really tricky and you can easily get wrong. If you've never heard of basting before, it's using large temporary stitches in order to keep things in place instead of pins, so I can make sure that my zipper is not only in the right way, but that I'm not sewing too close to the teeth of the zipper and getting caught when I go to actually put the dress on. It saves me from a lot of heartache. Then my final construction steps were to do up that back seam unevenly, because I did do the hemming before I did up the back seam, and to whip stitch down the lining to the outer layer of fabric around the zipper and the waistline. Then with the construction complete, it was time for me to madly embroider away for probably 35 hours of my life that I will never get back. The signs are arranged according to the hemo spectrum, but I made sure that the middle row and dead center was the Cancer symbol in bright red to get some contrast with the other signs that are pretty muted. I drew my signs on with a water-soluble marking pen before I started stitching, and I made sure to get every single canon character that I could among the various hemo spectrums. It would be pretty easy to make something like this yourself, and I'll leave all of the colors of DMC floss that I used in the description box below. You could easily do this kind of project with a dress that's already existing or a dress that you want to make, but make sure to back your fabric with an interfacing first so that the tension doesn't make it pucker. They make tear-away and wash-away interfacings, but a mid-weight fusible is what I chose for this because it does a great job adding volume to the skirt even while I'm not wearing a petticoat. It's also a pretty easy project if you've never done embroidery before. The backstitch isn't difficult, and because you have the guide of where you've drawn beforehand, you know where you're stabbing through your stitches. Although the fit isn't perfect, I love the way this dress turned out, and I love all the embroidery especially. If you do make something inspired by my dress, I would love to see it. You can tag me at SpookyScaryScouticus on Instagram, and I'll be back in about 2 weeks with the other dress I wore to that same con, only this one was Sailor Moon themed.